Some of the worst things people have ever said to me, at work anyway, have been in the comment boxes in a Word document. These tiny, angry little boxes have questioned my command of the English language, challenged my career choices, and made incorrect assertions about my ability to use an apostrophe. They were frustrating at best, hurtful at worst. That was about 7 years ago that I saw these, and now looking back, I can better understand where they came from. They'd been written on pages of content that I had rewritten in the name of digital transformation. I had written these pages by myself using just an existing website for reference. I'd written them by myself after I'd met a team at a small government agency, sat in their boardroom and presented them with a grand plan. I was going to transform their content by closing down their website and replacing it with a couple of pages on another website. Unsurprisingly, they were purposefully uncooperative for the duration of this project. They didn't understand why digital transformation was happening. They didn't respect my skills or the skills of the other people in my team, and they let us know about it. They didn't return our emails or phone calls, but they did return heavily marked up Word documents. But most importantly, they felt that their own experience and knowledge as subject matter experts was being disrespected. Now, I'm pretty sure what they had taken away from that meeting was, this woman's going to come along and take this product we've worked on for years, rip it up and chuck it out. And fair enough too. It's only because they got browbeaten by my project manager that we got the project delivered on time. But we'd hardly transformed anything, we'd really just moved some content around. Now, fast forward to 2016, which is several years and several similar projects later, and I was reminded of this experience when I landed on the ACC website upgrade project as a consultant who would support the digital team to deliver the content. The conditions were perfect to repeat some painful history.
So Amy's story came as no surprise to me. I'd experienced much of the same, 6 years debating where to put a full stop. Marked out Word documents arrived in my inbox every single day. It was the way that we worked. I met Amy about 1 month into a new job as a content advisor at ACC. That's the Accident Compensation Corporation, but no one calls it that, right? So probably a lot of you have experienced ACC or had them support you in the past, whether you kind of knew that at the time or not. But for those of you that don't, ACC is a government scheme that helps pay for treatment costs and supports you if you have an accident in New Zealand and you're injured. So when I arrived at ACC, they were about a couple of months into a sprint-based project to upgrade the acc.co.nz website. And yes, the website was in serious need of an overhaul. That was it.
Yeah.
So at that time, the existing ACC website had over 20,000 pages and collateral. That's a lot. Of that, only a very small percentage was actually being used by our customers. And there was even quite a lot of information that we weren't providing them with at all. Now, when I talk about our customers, it could pretty much be everyone and anyone in New Zealand, you guys sitting in this room. It's injured people that need ACC to help pay for their treatment costs. It's business customers that pay ACC levies so that their employees are covered at work. And it's those healthcare providers that are looking after our injured people.
So as Tania mentioned, the project was running through design sprints. And if anybody is unfamiliar with what a design sprint is, it's a time-boxed set of activities. So at this stage in the project, a sprint was about a week long. Later on in the project, they got a bit longer. And during that period of time, the project team would work together on the navigation and the interaction design of the site. So they went through this 5-step process. They'd discover everything that they needed to know about the problem or whatever they were going to design for the week. And then they would define that problem and how they expected to tackle it. And then they would design a solution or an idea for that together, and that would be in a prototype, which might have been a piece of paper or just some wireframes or an interactive prototype. And then they would test that with real people. And then based on the feedback from those real people, they would either make changes or say, yep, that's good, and move on to the next sprint, maybe with a new problem or maybe progressing that same problem. Now, the plan for the upgrade of the site was to launch a beta site first. So that was a test version that we would share more widely than those weekly test sessions, but it wouldn't go completely public yet, and it was something that we could progressively refine as we went along.
So, we had 8 weeks until beta launch. We had a pretty huge task ahead of us. At that point, the project had already defined 37 priority tasks, but we didn't have much else. We had no content audit, we had no content strategy to tell us what to do. We had one full-time content lead, that was me. I also had 2 writers that I could use part-time as needed, but they weren't actually assigned to the project. So it's pretty fair to say at that point I was freaking out.
Hey, you had a part-time content consultant.
Yeah. The design of the site was already sprinting ahead, and I hadn't even learned all the AC acronyms. How on earth were we going to get all of this content written? But yes, luckily I had a pretty awesome consultant there, but she was also only part-time.
Yeah. Now, faced with this situation, I could have come in like a wrecking ball, played the hotshot consultant card, and commanded all of the stakeholders to sign off all the content right then and there or else. But I did not have a stick big enough to compel anybody to do anything. And I was old enough, wise enough, and probably most importantly, jaded enough to know that this would be incredibly painful. And I thought back to that scary government team in their scary boardroom and remembered how hard I had made their lives and how undervalued I had made them feel by the approach I had taken to working with them. And I didn't want to do that again. So I started thinking about the people that we would need to help us publish those 37 tasks in 8 weeks. Our subject matter experts within ACC. What was their situation, and what would be their motivations and barriers to working with us? There are always dozens of projects on the go at ACC, and at this time they were deep into a major transformation program. So getting content to sign off was just another thing on top of the work that these guys were already doing. They'd likely be stressed out by us coming and crashing in on them and demanding that they sign something off just to meet our schedule. And we also knew that subject matter experts in a complex government organisation like ACC are quite technically minded, and they are deeply invested and very experienced in their own subject areas. So they're not experienced writers, and their knowledge of an ACC style guide would be low to non-existent. They probably had an idea that the website upgrade project was going on because the transformation program was sending out lots of comms, but they didn't really have a stake in it. Yeah.
So the project had already taken a user-first approach to identify those top 37 tasks I mentioned earlier. Those 37 tasks were all based on research, existing research that we had on hand. So that was things like Google Analytics, call centre data and feedback, TreeJack test, customer personas, things like that. So we knew that we wanted our whole approach to the design of the new website to be human-centred, but that also included the content. How are we going to do that? We knew that we were going to think about our customers every single step of the way and use that research every step of the way. And then we were going to test, iterate, and keep refining the more that we learnt about them.
But what if we thought about our subject matter experts every step of the way? We couldn't take away the work that was already on these guys, but we could manage it more effectively. We could reduce their stress by making it clear what we needed from them and when, and we could remove complexity. Forget about building a complicated comms strategy or trying to educate technical policy advisors about a style guide. Instead of making work for them, how might we work with them? One day when I was trying to figure out how we were going to meet this 8-week deadline and write these 37 tasks without getting eviscerated by policy advisors, I sketched out this plan. So I wanted to make use of the momentum that the design sprints were already generating and any designs or feedback or learnings that they were gathering along the way. And I thought about an approach I'd heard about called peer writing from a friend of mine who works at the Government Digital Service in the UK. So this is broadly what we thought we might do, and you'll see it's quite similar to what I showed you before. We'd have a discovery phase where we'd figure out everything we could about the task we were going to focus on and the content that we might write, who the users were, how it related to other content, what the user journeys might be. Then we would design it through pair writing, sit down together and write it. And I'll explain what pair writing is a bit more in a minute, but in a nutshell, it's basically when a writer and subject matter experts sit down together and write the content on the spot, rather than a writer writing it in isolation and firing off a document for somebody to sign off. And then we would test with users, whether that be formal or informal, just whatever we could manage. Then we'd iterate, make some changes, review it, publish it onto the beta site. Easy. Now, I'd never actually seen this process done before when I took it to Tania, and it wasn't until we started working on this talk that I found out that she had no idea at the time, that I had no idea whether or not this was going to work. But we didn't really have anything to lose, so we decided to give it a shot. And because we're all about the human-centered design, we ran a workshop one morning with some friendly subject matter experts and a couple of our writers to see if pair writing might work as an approach for us and for them. And we had a debrief afterwards, and it went kind of along the lines of, well, that worked. Should we just keep going then?
And then our content cycle was born. So we broke that massive, big, scary task ahead of us into far more manageable, bite-sized chunks. Finally, our content sprints were running alongside our design sprints rather than chasing it. It's important to note as well that our project team was actually co-located. So we had the UX, the design, the web development, and the content all sitting in the same room, helping each other out, which made our lives a lot easier. So all going well, this content cycle was what a typical week looked like for us. It's also important to note that before our subject matter experts got involved in this process, they were actually pretty well briefed, so it didn't come as a massive surprise. About a month or two out before we actually would start writing content, we ran stakeholder engagement meetings. So it gave them a really good heads up of what was coming, what the project was about, and they were then able to prioritise the project and make sure people were available for us to work with when we got to the writing. We also did what we called discovery briefings. So this was about half an hour with the subject matter experts, and it basically explained to them what was expected of them, what they had to expect, and what the project was about. So we were ready to go when we were ready to start writing. So, a typical week for us. We'd start Monday morning with a bit of admin, check your emails, get it out of the way, and of course we had to have coffee. Then we got stuck into what we called our pre-discovery sessions. So pre-discovery was just with the project team. And the reason for this was to make sure that we were really well prepared before we actually went and met with our subject matter experts. It meant that they didn't have to then go ahead and explain the basics to us, and we didn't have to use up even more of their valuable time. And we were already armed with questions and ready to go when we met them. So in pre-discovery, we basically used the existing website and the content and all of that research that I mentioned earlier that we could get our hands on to make sure we were really prepared on the topic.
Are you ready for this one now?
That's you.
Yeah.
Yep. So by the end of pre-discovery, this is kind of what we would end up with. Basically, one person in the team would go away, they'd learn about that topic or task, and then they would brief the team on this for about 5 to 10 minutes. Then as a team, we would look at all of the existing research that we had on hand and would create a bit of a matrix. So we'd look at who do we think our audience is, why do we think they're looking for this information, what are any of the pain points that we know they have, and what are any assumptions we're making about them that we need to confirm or deny. Oh, this is me again. So.
Yeah.
Gosh, talking. So then we will go on to Tuesday. So Tuesday was a discovery session with the subject matter experts in the room. So this was just 2 hours. It wasn't too long. We also often would have several subject matter experts across different areas of the business. And this actually turned out to work really well because they ended up learning quite a lot off each other. When we went into the discovery session, we would have the big pre-discovery sheets already up on the wall and ready to go. We already knew what our questions were, we already knew about the topic, so we could basically just get stuck straight in. Essentially, a discovery session was an interactive brainstorming session. So it was breaking down everything we knew, looking at the who, what, when, where, how, thinking about where the related topics lie, what were the related content, and what the end-to-end journey looked like for our customers. It was lots of questions flying around, back and forth, and basically everything that we learned we just threw up on a post-it note to make sure that we had it captured.
I love it when you say you threw something up on a post-it note. The end of every discovery session, we ended up with a user need that everybody had agreed on. So early on in the project, we decided that every piece of content needed to have a user need that was based on evidence. The user needs really helped us to define a task that could be completed rather than information that should be read. Now, the existing ACC website was very information heavy. And this was a really iterative process that we went through with the subject matter experts, and it really helped them to understand and think about what the content needed to do and what the context of the user was, rather than what ACC needed to tell them. So early on in, say, that discovery session, we might have had a user need like the one on the left when we were working on the content for business owners paying their ACC levies, which was, as a business owner, I need to use the online levy calculator so that I know how much my ACC levy is. Now, that might ultimately be what the business owner does, but it doesn't explain why they're doing it or the process that they go through to do it. So we iterated on that and came up with, as a business owner, I need to know how much my ACC levies will be so that I don't get a shock when I get my invoice in the mail and I can plan my cash flow. We also, in the discovery sessions, agreed on what we called acceptance criteria. So this is like a checklist for how we knew we were getting it right on a page. It's what the pair writing teams would use when they sat down to start writing to know what they were going to write about. It helped them structure their headings. And they also used it to refer to when they'd finished a piece of content, just to make sure that they'd covered everything. So for that same example, it might be something like, at the end of this page, a business owner will know how much their invoice is going to be, what it's going to contain, why they're paying it, and when they will receive their invoice. And then on Tuesday and Wednesday is when the pair writing sessions took place. So we tried to spread them out because they were incredibly intense. And we didn't want people getting brain freeze or just getting exhausted from it. And they would take place in what we called Content Corner. This is Content Corner. It was literally a corner of the floor where the project team was co-located. It's got all the artifacts on the wall from the discovery sessions. It's got printouts from the style guide. It's got any personas that might be relevant up on the wall. And it also had our design principles for the wider website project. We also had a poster outlining our ground rules for pair writing, which were basically, we're in this together, no one person is more important than another. We are equally novice and expert in this process, and we listen, we give feedback, not criticism. So then the writer and the subject matter expert would sit down together like this over a laptop, and they'd agree who would do the writing and who would get to ask the tricky questions about the content. Now, we always extended the offer to the subject matter experts to have a go at writing themselves, but funnily enough, they never took us up on it. And this approach really worked because it focused on getting the information out first, and the style and the grammar and all that came second. And it also created a shared understanding and joint ownership of something people could be really proud of. And all of this set us up for success in the future. It's important to also note that this is in Wellington, but not all of the subject matter experts were based in Wellington. So we still wanted to involve them in the process, so some of the writers went out on pair writing field trips to Dunedin and Hamilton just to get that coverage.
So Wednesday after the first pair writing session had taken place, we'd then do a quick check-in and a bit of a review of how the content was tracking. This was then fed back to the peers, and it was a really good opportunity for them to then take that feedback on board and make some changes in their second peer writing session. So then, after both peer writing sessions were finished, we'd tap someone on the shoulder and do a quick gorilla test. And if we were really overachieving, we would do this twice, so once after each peer writing session. The gorilla test was a really, really great way to get quick and easy feedback. And most importantly, it was a real eye-opener for those subject matter experts. It was the first time that they'd seen real people interacting with their content, and it clearly showed the need of how important it is to be clear and concise, using plain English, and how easily different people interpret information in different ways. So, by the end of Thursday, once both the peer writing sessions were done and the content was more or less complete, the peers were happy. Historically, or normally, what we'd do would send the content through to the subject matter experts for sign-off. But instead, we did what we called an endorsement session. So an endorsement session often involved several people that were involved in those initial discovery sessions that felt that they needed to sign off the content. Sometimes this was actually delegated to the subject matter expert that did the peer writing, which would make our lives a whole lot easier. But either way, endorsement session was 30 minutes, it was in person, and it was sitting in front of the computer. We could sort out any issues and answer any questions right on the spot, right there and then. And 9 times out of 10, we would get sign-off on the spot. So no more marked out Word documents.
This is when we knew we were winning. We got everything written in time with few major arguments. And to anyone who was a content writer in the room, just take a moment to appreciate that. That never happens. It was such a turnaround. We asked for some feedback from the subject matter experts who were involved, and this is what they came back with. They had felt involved and heard all along the way. One of them said they'd discovered a new appreciation for digital content writers. You just couldn't ask for better feedback than that. My favourite is this one from a woman who says this was the most useful and organised way of working with another business unit within ACC that she'd experienced in the last 3 years of working there. Yeah, I know, right? So our approach to treating people like people was paying off. But it's also really important to say just how important it was to take a beta approach to the site. It meant that it was lower risk, and the subject matter experts didn't feel like everything had to be absolutely perfect, because they're naturally risk-averse people. Before it went up on the site, they could still change it, and it wasn't going out to the public straight away.
So one of the things that worked especially well for the beta site was that we had a feedback button throughout the entire project, and we actually still have that feedback button up on the live site at the moment. We really encouraged our customers, our stakeholders, all of those subject matter experts, and any other members across ACC to give feedback at any time. But what was most important about that feedback is that we were, and we still are, actually responding to it. So it's not just a black hole where the feedback goes. So if we see trends coming through, we see really valuable feedback that we think could help our customers, we actually go ahead and try and make changes to the website based on that. And we also involve the subject matter expert in that process if it's affecting the content that we worked on with them. So I have to admit, it was a pretty awesome feeling when we got great feedback like this coming into our inbox. Yeah, pretty awesome.
Yeah, good job.
Good job.
Good job, Tim.
So where are we now? Amy left me. Yeah, she had to. We couldn't pay for her anymore. But we now have a shiny new website. And the shiny new website has less than 100 pages of quality content. Less than 100. I will admit there's a few documents still hanging around, but it's a heck of a lot better than the 20,000 that we started with. The way that we worked with our subject matter experts meant that we could create content fast and we could get sign-off fast. Our subject matter experts then became our advocates across the business. So they talked about the process and how they enjoyed it and how well it worked. They felt really valued and heard, and they had ownership over that content because they actually helped to create it. And we actually asked them to feedback on this process, as Amy mentioned, so I'm not making this up. We slowed down, so we're no longer sprinting, but we are still doing the peer writing and we are still using that content cycle, just at a bit more of a sustainable pace. We also learnt a lot throughout this process, and I could bang on about it for a while, but some of the key things that we learnt were, firstly, make sure you buy your subject matter expert's coffee. It goes a really long way. The second one is we gave up trying to write content with more than one subject matter expert. So instead of peer writing with more than the peer, we would invite them along to the discovery session at the start so we could still get their input. Sometimes in that discovery session, though, we didn't always have the right people in the room, and that's because it was really hard to recruit people and really time-consuming. And lastly, but probably most importantly, be wary of the burnout. We were sprinting so fast, it didn't allow a lot of time for iteration, and it didn't really allow time for holidays, except for Amy. She wanted 2 holidays, one before beta launch and one before public launch. Thanks, Amy.
I just want to defend myself slightly here. I was able to take holidays because Tania could handle it and she didn't need me. And also, she took a holiday right before this talk and left me to write it myself. So. But what we really learned was not how to make a cool-sounding process with loopy diagrams, but we learned to think of people as people. And a note for anyone thinking of doing something similar, this is what worked for ACC and ACC's people. What works for your people might be different. But if you do want to give doing something like this a go, think about who your people are and what might work for them. Give them a chance, give them a voice. Treat your stakeholders not as resources, roadblocks, or necessary evils, but as real people with a stake in the success of your design process. That's what works for everybody. Thank you.